Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry I missed that introduction, but I'm thrilled to be here in Moscow. It was very funny to see my younger self in that photograph. That was about 12 years ago that Lara showed. And it's true that the New York museum community is quite small, but Lara and I just met on the airplane on our way to Moscow. So I'm thankful for this trip to introduce us, and I'm very thrilled to be here with all of you, and thank you to the Garage Museum for organizing this really wonderful few days together. So, I'm going to take you to the other end of the spectrum, age-wise, and from older adults with dementia and Alzheimer's, we're going to focus on children of early childhood age. My name is Hana Elwell. I'm the Director of Exhibits at the Brooklyn Children's Museum. Our target age is 0 to 8, so we serve the youngest. And I'd also like to thank colleagues who presented earlier today, specifically, or particularly Sophia and Maria, who lay the foundation for ASD and offered some foundational knowledge to all of us, because I'm going to focus on much more practical matters and share a space at the Brooklyn Children's Museum that we created for children on the autistic spectrum. Need to get all my systems. Okay. So, welcome to the Brooklyn Children's Museum, one of the oldest children's museums in the world, founded in 1899. This is a photograph of the original building, the original mansion that housed the museum, which was located in a park and actually just adjacent to the physical site where the museum is located today in Brooklyn, New York. Oh, okay. Okay. I have to look in several places. Okay, so at the Brooklyn Children's Museum, since its founding, it has always been a place that has believed in children guiding their own education, children planting the seed of curiosity, and really letting children explore through hands-on experiences, whether this is touching a scientific specimen or exploring a collections object, really creating questions, very much in the mode of inquiry-based education, before perhaps it had that name, but very much in that train of thought. I'm actually going to skip to this one. So, at the Children's Museum, we're very fortunate that the exhibits that we have are already inclusive because they are very hands-on, they're very sensory. Many of them have materials to explore and interactives within them. In this photograph, this series of photographs, these are our permanent exhibitions. On the top left, this is an area that is a bakery where you can play with different simulated fake baking materials and bake some traditional breads. The lower left, this is the beach experience where you can immerse your hands in blue sand and sift and dig and build. On the bottom right, this is a water table where you can build dams, you can experiment with the flow of water, see the cause and effect. And in the top right is the famous light tunnel, which greets you as you enter the museum. So it's this immersive experience that is very dynamic light. There's running water all the way through it. It's been a fixture of the museum since the 70s when the building was built, and is something I think that's very memorable and very touching to people. They remember this experience of walking down the tunnel. So already, unlike an art museum where you can't touch, we have this space where things are very inviting and bright and colorful. Oops. So I'm backing up. So inclusivity is built into the structure of the museum experience. All children belong in these spaces that exist in the museum. All exhibits have been built to be ADA accessible. Educators are trained to lead activities and facilitate programs for many different kinds of visitors. That's part of the training they receive. And I'd like to also share some of what Lara presented about educator training and connecting with people, because that's something that we also build into our training program. So this is a photograph of one of our educators. Actually, some people here may have met this individual. Her name is Wema. She was at the museum for quite a while, and she is sharing an object from the museum's collection with some visitors. So we have a collection of nearly 30,000 objects, cultural material, and scientific specimen that are all hands-on. Most of them are hands-on, the ones we share. And that, again, is quite an amazing opportunity for visitors to have a hands-on sensory experience, which I know is a rare opportunity in museums. But even if it's a replica, or even if it's material that you're offering that's related to an object, having that tactile sensory experience is really wonderful. So despite the fact that everything is already pretty accessible, in 2013, the museum wanted to devote a space to really serving families on the autistic spectrum. And Sophie, I'd like to share that statistic you offered earlier again, which was that 1 out of 68 children in the US is diagnosed with autism. So the reason that this was the focus group, or the focal area for the development of this space, was really related to that statistic, that there was a very high need for it. That at the museum we were seeing a large number of visitors who we knew would benefit from this space. And we recognized that the museum, I think someone commented, or an earlier presenter talked about the noise level in museums. They can be very noisy places. The Children's Museum can be thunderous. The sound of children screaming and running can be very overwhelming for me and for parents and for other children. So we wanted to create a space of refuge and respite to give families a place to sort of bring it down. So we embarked on this process of designing and developing the sensory room. We created an advisory committee of professionals representing the notes, of professionals representing different groups of special needs. So these were school professionals, these were teachers, parents, access advocates, and a pretty broad spectrum of people to help us, because we knew we didn't have the resources internally. The room was an existing space. I'm sorry I don't have a picture of the classroom before. It was there was nothing remarkable about it. It was a room, an empty room with a sink, which has proven to be very helpful for materials. But we started with a bare classroom. And these are some of the pieces of furniture that the advisory committee suggested that we procure for the room. These were all modular pieces of furniture that could be used in different ways, that could be set up for different modalities of movement and interaction. You see the purple tunnel type thing on the upper left. You'll see in subsequent photos, and it's very versatile. You can turn it upside down, you can create it into a rocker, you can tunnel under it, you can set it upright and create kind of a clubhouse hidden area. We have several pieces of this bottom left piece. We call it the wave. And you can set it up and it creates this bumpy surface, which is great for gross motor movement. This huge bean bag, the only liability is that parents really love to lay on it. And sometimes it's a little awkward to ask a parent to move because this space is really for children. Parents are very tired. This red circular structure, I don't actually know what to call it, but it rocks. So you can use it as a balance manipulative, or you can just sort of play around with it. And then these other small pillows are made out of rubber, and they're filled with different fillers, little balls, so they all have a different texture. And we require that visitors to this space remove their shoes. So when they're stepping on these surfaces, there's a real sensation, a different sensation that they can compare. Oh, you got it. So the furniture choices were dictated so we could really set up the room in different ways every time. That the educator who was setting up the room could think about, the day, the traffic flow, how many people would be passing through, and then set up the room accordingly and balance the different kinds of interaction. So here you can really see the different ways that the purple tunnel is used, creating an interior space that's a little reading nook in the middle. We often set up a music area, unless it's a very busy day and there's so much background noise or noise outside the room that you wouldn't want to create pandemonium inside the room. We also have a really wonderful water tube that changes color and light and has this spray of bubbles that is very mesmerizing. So in addition to the furniture components, which can be moved around and set up in different ways, so it's always new every time for visitors, we have these small pieces in the room that can be used to create an impromptu program and also be offered to general visitors if time and space allows. So we have a tropical fish tank. We have sometimes we hang fabric. This is a piece actually created by an artist we partnered with, and you can walk through it and feel the fabric against your skin and sort of experiment with different layers of transparency and looking through. Again, the bubble tube. And then these drawers show some of the smaller manipulatives. We have rain sticks, ribbon wands. We have bags with sensory materials, different kinds that you can explore with your hands. So I don't know if this translates at all into Russian. I don't think it does, but I also can't read it. We use an acronym called BEST. So in English, those letters are BEST, and they stand for balance, engage, space capacity, and tools. And this is something that was easy to digest for our educators and to remember and help guide them to set up the space. So, thank you. So balance is really thinking about the furniture setup and the program of the day based on the mood of the moment, based on how many visitors are in the museum and what the anticipated. You never know, of course, who's coming in, but the best guess about who might be joining you. Engage is about facilitating the space. This is always a facilitated space with the museum educator. The space capacity itself, we limit to 10 to 12 kids and their caregivers, so they're never more than 24, 25 people in the room at a time. It's a relatively small space, so that can even sometimes feel a little crowded. It depends how large the kids are. But we found that monitoring the controlling the traffic flow really impacts the experience. And the smaller it is, sometimes the more impactful the space can be for people who are, especially those seeking respite or rest from the rest of the museum experience. And lastly, tools. We want to give families the tools, whether it's something exciting to explore with their hands, to interact, or the tools to communicate with the child they're there with. So we really train our educators to, whether it's modeling behavior for parents or facilitating the program firsthand. So going back to the idea of balancing the space, it really is about organizing, that's an extra image on the bottom, balancing the space for different kinds of activity. So high impact might be creating a physical obstacle course where you're maybe stepping on those pillows that we saw earlier and tunneling through and balancing either by the child doing it by themselves or with the help of a caregiver. And medium impact might be, a self-guided activity, but something very active, playing a musical instrument, exploring some materials. Lower impact would be reading a book or putting together a puzzle, maybe in lower lighting, bringing down the mood to be a little quieter and softer. And so those activities are all happening in freely led, self-guided. And then we have our educator-based activities, where an educator is really guiding the experience. And these are some of the activities that we have found really successful in that space and don't require much at all. Well, there is a live animal on the top left, so that might not be accessible. But we have live animals in our collection and have found them particularly wonderful with audiences with special needs and use them a lot in the sensory room. I think the experience of connecting with a living creature and observing their body movements is something that just is very easy for kids to relate to, and also just in terms of gentle touching. There's some very wonderful lessons that can come from interacting with a live animal. So this is one of our educators introducing a lizard. It's hard to tell what it is, and a child's hand being guided to touch the animal. On the lower left, doing an art project, the tactile sense of putting your hands in paint. It's always exciting, not for all kids. Some kids do not enjoy that experience, and we're always open to caregivers helping to guide us in appropriate activities for who they're with. Music, again, is always successful, and in the lower right, an animal yoga class is shown, and that's when we use animal poses and animal movement to do yoga and stretching, and then end by meeting a live animal. We're not able to keep the room open all the time because we want it to be a facilitated space. So we invite community groups to use the space, whether it's school teachers or other community groups who want to come in and use the space for their own program. We're very welcoming of that. These are some examples of partnership programs that we've had. The top left is a program called the Friendship Circle, and it's a group that meets regularly outside the museum but comes once a month to the museum to use the sensory room. And then other hands-on programs that we've done. These are some of the training materials that we have developed to share with our staff. I think there's been mention of social stories and developing social stories to help guide and prepare visitors for the experience of coming to a museum. So our social story is called How Can I Use My Senses at the Brooklyn Children's Museum? And is something that we offer on our website when people inquire, when a class of kids with special needs books a tour, we send this to them as a material to reference beforehand. And on the right is a handbook that we have developed for internal use to really train our educators on different aspects of the sensory room, both physical setup and background on particular disabilities. This is an interior page of the social story, preparing families to come visit the museum. This is the museum from the outside. You can't miss it. It's a very bright building within a residential neighborhood. So hopefully you'll all come visit sometime. And it really guides a family through the process of physically arriving to the museum, walking into the front door, what they can expect to hear, what they can expect to physically encounter, the steps, holding their grown-up's hand, and then again, seeing this dynamic rainbow tunnel that they will see, hear the sound of running water as they're walking through, and have the experience of touching the water, which will feel cool. I wanted to touch briefly upon our collaborations with artists, as this is something that has been particularly inspiring to me in the last few years. We've been approached by artists who are really interested in exploring their own work through connecting with visitors with special needs and kids on the autistic spectrum. And this is the work, this is an actual art project created by an artist named Adrian Sass, who used technology to create this interactive screen made out of fabric that when kids touched it, the interaction between their touch and the sensors would create this amazing, colorful pattern. I can't tell you exactly how it worked. It was magical. But she came to observe the room, saw who was coming to use the space, and then set up this screen several times. And so it really was about reacting to touch and giving kids the space to explore cause and effect through their own touch and the experience of light and color. So, without seeing Lara's presentation, we ended in the same way. Some key words to think about as you move forward, perhaps creating a space wherever the museum or institution you work at, or thinking about these ideas as they might relate to creating a program. So the adaptation, the adaptation of programs in space, the inclusion and participation of children and visitors in the way that they are able. I think it's been said, but meeting visitors where they are and offering something new to explore. So honoring who they are and where they are as they walk in the door and giving them something new. Training staff and modeling positive interactions for caregivers and parents alike. Facilitating the discovery of new abilities and creating opportunities for collaboration. I think one of the really unique features of this space is the opportunity it's given the museum to welcome community partners. We have a relationship with a nearby college that has an occupational therapy program, and they contacted us several years ago and wanted to pursue a community component to their academic program. And so we have students come in from the program and sometimes lead programs within the sensory room or do observations there, and that has been a really wonderful learning opportunity. So I think I will end there and say thank you. And I would welcome any questions you have about more specific programs that we do in the sensory room, or anything else. I know we're trying to make up some time, so I tried to be concise.
Есть ли у кого-нибудь вопросы?
If anyone has any questions,
Здравствуйте.
hello,
Спасибо большое
and
за
thank
ваш
you very
рассказ.
much for your narration.
Sorry.
Hello, and thank you very
Здравствуйте.
much for your narration.
Спасибо большое.
Thanks a lot.
Если я правильно
As
поняла,
far as I
то это
understand you
пространство
correctly, these
доступно
spaces accessible
для
for
самых разных детей,
all sorts of children,
даже без определенных
even
занятий, даже без
without
экскурсий, игровых занятий и прочее.
excursion
За счет
or
чего
without specific actions
детям
with the
становится
children,
понятно, что
activities.
это не пространство для шумных игр. Вот вы говорите, что там есть пространство для
How
спокойных
children
игр. Как
understand that
дети
it's
понимают,
not
что вот здесь спокойные игры, а
a
вот там
place for
шумные игры
noisy
должны
games,
быть.
how they understand that
Спасибо.
this is a place of relaxation and not the place where you should play with a lot of noise.
Thank you for asking that. It's something I wanted to touch upon because I think, well, I know that the model of inclusion has its challenges within a museum space. We want this to be an inclusive space where everyone is welcome, but that sometimes requires an educator to intervene and make it clear what the tone and mode of the space is. And I think though we have signage explaining how the sensory room developed, and that it was created for specifically for children and families on the ASD, I think that not everyone reads that sign or realizes that it is a special space. So sometimes it requires explanation to especially the caretakers or parents of kids who are loud. I should have said also that we control the traffic flow and the visitor flow in the space. And if if there are too many people waiting, then we have 20-minute sessions. And so we have more of a structured experience, and then we move people through the space. And when there are children who self-identify as needing more time, of course we allow them to stay. But it is a little tricky because we are asking people to let us know, because of course you can't always tell outwardly.
Есть ли еще вопросы?
Are there any more questions?
Hana, thank you for sharing all of that. It looks like an incredible space. I'm curious, do you have any feedback that you can share that you've gotten from families or other visitors or other museum colleagues or other designers?
Yes. I think logistically, controlling the number of people in the space can sometimes be very difficult on busy days. So we've experimented with different systems like a wristband or checking in at the front desk when you first get there saying, would you like to come to the sensory room? If you would, we encourage you to sign up ahead of time because it can become like a big crowd at the door. So that's just one logistic, is how you control the number of people in a space successfully. I think something I didn't mention was we have a monthly program that's a theme-based program specifically geared toward families of kids with ASD, and having that continuous group who have kind of formed bonds with each other and have gotten to know each other over time has been really wonderful. So that's sort of a side component of the sensory room that has happened in that space. And that's been a very successful piece that families have really appreciated, similar to programs at MoMA, where they're getting to know an educator over time, getting to know the format of the program that is consistent, and that is more of a self-contained space, not an inclusive space necessarily.
Thank you, Hana. Thank you. Ну что,